keys are to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. Going to talk about the 49ers' new defensive coordinator hire, Raheem Morris, and how he's going to transform the 49ers defense. And I know the first thing you think is it's going to be status quo. We've been running the same defense or the same look in San Francisco since Kyle Shanahan got here. But actually, the defense has evolved a lot, especially when it comes to coverages. But I think when it comes to the front, it's been pretty much the same. Now, they did not run a wide nine. The early part of Robert Saleh's time in San Francisco, the wide nine came with Chris Kasarik. And when Chris Kasarik came, that's when the pass rush really took off. That's when you saw D Ford come on the scene, Nick Bosa come on the scene, and the 49ers were able to generate pass rush from the interior and from the outside. And so we've seen the 49ers stick with the formula that's worked. When Robert Saleh was in San Francisco, it worked. When DeMeco Ryans took over, it continued to work. And even when Steve Wilks was defensive coordinator in 2023, it worked for the most part. 49ers generated pass rush, put pressure on quarterbacks, made them make quick decisions. Now, when Nick Sorensen took over in 2024, the defense took a step back in a big way. So they brought back Robert Saleh. And that was an extensive process. A lot of fans got nervous because Robert Saleh was out in the head coaching portion of interviews, and he was kind of going around and meeting with tons of teams. And they were wondering if Kyle Shanahan had put all of his eggs in one basket and it could backfire, and they were going to have to make a decision on a defensive coordinator they didn't want to. And everyone kind of let it play out, and it worked out. Robert Saleh came to San Francisco. The defense, it wasn't perfect for sure. I think a lot of that is injuries. When you lose your top two all-pro players, and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, it plays a big part in it. But you saw the plan be reinstituted. Robert Saleh came in and started putting together a blueprint for rebuilding this defense, not just with schematics, but with personnel as well. Now you go through a similar situation. Robert Saleh gets a head coaching job. He's in and out after 1 year. He started laying a foundation. Now you need somebody to come in and help build off that foundation. And Kyle Shanahan kind of goes the same route that he went with Robert Saleh. He's waiting for things to play out. He's allowing these coaches to go through the coaching cycle and see if they're going to land head coaching jobs. And when all is said and done, Raheem Morris does not land a head coaching job. He's been a head coach, out for the Atlanta Falcons. This is a guy that's had two failed stints now as a head football coach. And so that means more than likely he can be a long-term option for the 49ers. And Kyle Shanahan had to overlook Gus Bradley, and that probably wasn't easy decision to make. But Raheem Morris and Kyle Shanahan go back. They started their careers coaching together as quality control coaches all the way back in 2002 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they have known each other for a long time. In fact, Kyle Shanahan's the one that took him to Washington when Mike Shanahan was there. He wanted Raheem Morris there. He values Raheem Morris a lot. And so waiting out Raheem Morris, I'm sure, wasn't hard for Kyle Shanahan. I think what was difficult was just making guys wait. And so Raheem Morris is going to be coming to San Francisco, and with it come some new ideas. Maybe a little bit of adjustments here and there. I'm not saying wholesale changes. I don't think he's going to come and just say, okay, we're not running the wide nine anymore. We're making wholesale changes on defense. But what we've seen from Raheem Morris is a guy that's been willing to change with personnel. So whatever the personnel dictates, that's kind of what he does as a defensive coordinator. And in my opinion, that's the best defensive coordinator and type of coach that you can get, is somebody that evaluates the personnel and then says, okay, this is what we're going to do defensively, schematically, to enhance the abilities of my players so that way they can play the best possible football they can. I'm going to look at their strengths, their weaknesses, and I'm going to be multiple in my looks. It's no different than what Kyle Shanahan does, right? He's trying to get a schematic advantage by the personnel that he's going to be able to run. That's what Raheem Morris is going to do. You look at what he did in Atlanta, drafted a ton of edge rushers, a ton of pressure off the outside. It was really predicated on speed. What are the comments that Kyle Shanahan has been making? We need to get faster. We need to get faster everywhere. And Raheem Morris is going to put his stamp on this football team. We're going to talk about what that stamp means. We're going to talk about Raheem Morris, what he has been able to do in his career, and we're going to kind of get an idea of what this 49ers defense is going to look like moving forward, because I think it's important to see what pieces the 49ers have, how that can set up some multiple looks for Raheem Morris, and also what that means for free agency. Does it open the doors to more players that normally weren't schematic fits? Possibly. What does it also mean for the NFL draft and how they go about it? I think it signals to a couple of adjustments that the 49ers can make to kind of enhance their football team and maybe add a couple of players here and there that wouldn't normally be scheme fit. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating if you feel like I deserve it. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, the title sponsor of 49ers Cutback. So let's get to know Raheem Morris a little bit. Now, he's 49 years old, and he's been around the league for a long time. I brought up the fact that he was around in 2002 in Tampa Bay with Kyle Shanahan, and he was a defensive quality control coach, and eventually he became the defensive backs coach. That's probably why, if you haven't heard yet, Daniel Bullock is moving on from San Francisco. They had a mutual agreement for him to depart, and he is going to end up in Green Bay for Jonathan Gannon, newly hired Jonathan Gannon, and that Green Bay Packers defense. And that's probably why Raheem Morris tried to get the 49ers to interview the defensive backs coach in Atlanta. Of course, Atlanta blocked it, won't allow him to leave. But that's why Joe Woods probably came in for a defensive coordinator role. Now, with Joe Woods, it looks like it's going to be a slow play. If you don't know who Joe Woods is, he was the defensive pass game coordinator and secondary coach for the 49ers in 2019 before he landed the defensive coordinator job with the Cleveland Browns. He is waiting to see what shakes out in Cleveland, where he could potentially be the defensive coordinator there, or some of the other jobs around the league. Now, if those don't materialize, expect Joe Woods to potentially end up in San Francisco as secondaries coach and probably defensive pass game coordinator, the same role he held in 2019. So Raheem Morris is going to fill out this staff. He's got to hire a new secondary coach. I think the most likely is Joe Woods, but there is a chance that it could be somebody else. So we'll see what happens. We do know there's going to be a change there as Daniel Bullock moves on. So he was hired as a head coach at just 32 years old. Then he was fired and he moved on. And so he coached with Kyle Shanahan in a couple of stints. It was, of course, in Tampa Bay. That's where they got their start. And then they were on the same staff, of course, in Washington, where he was with Mike Shanahan. And then he ended up in Atlanta on the same staff with Kyle Shanahan when, Morris, he worked on both sides of the ball, and he worked with Kyle Shanahan when he was the offensive coordinator. So these guys are really good friends. Of course, everyone's probably heard about the story of Kyle Shanahan sticking up for Raheem Morris in 2005 during the NFL Combine. They went to a cafe, and Raheem Morris was mistaken for somebody they were looking for. The police had, that they were doing a hunt for, and they took him down. Kyle Shanahan got involved, was trying to slow down the situation, and Kyle Shanahan ended up getting arrested for public intoxication. And so these guys have known each other for a long time. Kyle Shanahan feels strongly about him, and they are going to have a real understanding of how each other ticks. And Kyle knows how good Raheem Morris has been in his career. Raheem Morris has also ran multiple defenses. So it's not like he's tied to just one brand of defense. He's not just tied to one front. He has ran a lot of 3-4 defensive looks in his career. In fact, that's what he was building in Atlanta. That's what he ran when he was the defensive coordinator for the Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams in 2021. So there is a tie to the 3-4 defense. Those guys that play standing up, bringing pressure off the outside, right? That's why he brought in guys like Leonard Floyd. That's why he drafted James Pierce Jr. and Jalen Walker. Those were the guys who were generating pressure off the outside. And Atlanta was able to generate a lot of pass rush this season. What they weren't able to do well was stop the run. That was something the 49ers had been working on when Robert Saleh came to town last offseason, was stopping the run. And so that's going to be something Raheem Morris has got to find balance with. But if he can infuse some of the looks that he was able to generate when it came to pass rush for this 49ers defense. You would like to see them make an uptick, but they have the tools to slow down the run a little bit. It's got to get better, right? Some of these young guys got to step up, but there's a foundation being laid in San Francisco. But he was the defensive coordinator for that Super Bowl champion team in 2021 that defeated the Cincinnati Bengals. And so he has had opportunities to be defensive coordinator. He was a defensive coordinator in Atlanta before he coached there in 2020. He was defensive coordinator with the Los Angeles Rams. So he's been around a little bit, just a little foundation on him and the fact that he's seen a lot. When he broke into the league, it was the Tampa 2 defense. He ran a lot of Tampa 2 when he first became defensive coordinator. He's adjusted just like everyone else. He's ran more cover 3. A lot of defenses around the league now are running a lot more quarters defense. And so you're seeing a lot of different changes when it comes to coverages. And I expect the 49ers to continue to be multiple when it comes to those coverages. Now, have his defenses always been as successful, right? Like if you were looking at the 3 candidates that were up for the head or the defensive coordinator job for the 49ers, you have to look at what was going on with Jim Schwartz. I think the 49ers would have loved to have interviewed Jim Schwartz. He never became available. It didn't appear that he was going to become available. I think he would have been option 1 in pretty much everyone's mind because it was top 10 defense after top 10 defense after top 10 defense. And that's not what you are going to get from Raheem Morris. But Raheem Morris has still had successful defenses. It just hasn't been probably what everyone would want out of a top defensive coordinator, and he's going to have to turn that around a little bit. Now, it was enough to win the Super Bowl in 2021. Now, you looked at what Gus Bradley had done recently. He hadn't had a lot of success as defensive coordinator. Early on in his NFL career, he was very successful in his time with Seattle with the Legion of Boom. That was a long time ago. So the 49ers had some options. I think that once again, what I loved about the options that they were looking at was the fact that they were all former head coaches, all had been defensive coordinators in multiple stints, are well-versed in the NFL now, but also the trends of the NFL and where it's going. And I think that's one of the things I really want to talk about in this episode is the trends of where the NFL is going. It's not enough to know where the NFL is. You also have to know where it's headed. Because every single year, offensive coordinators throw something different at you. In 2019, what became all the rave in the NFL was Kyle Shanahan's 21 personnel with the outside zone mixed with the gap scheme and the way that his personnel was able to take advantage of smaller, faster defensive players. That was all the rave. If you go back a little bit further, it was Sean McVay with his 3 wide receiver sets and 11 personnel that created run lanes, and that had to eventually be slowed down by Vic Fangio going to the quarters defense and the match quarters defense. You have to continue to stop these trends, and now what is the NFL? It's 13 personnel. Big looks with 3 tight ends on the field and 1 running back, and they're taking advantage of smaller defensive backs. As the league has changed and got more spread out, defenses have went to more smaller, faster receivers that can cover in space. So what do offenses do? They say, you know what? We're going to get bigger. We're going to take advantage of our size against your smaller players, and that's where the league's at. So as the defenses try to catch up, they've got to look to see what the next trend is going to be. And so that's the ultimate goal. And I think one thing that could happen in this one is Raheem Morris could come with a very hybrid style defense. And I think a lot of people are going to scoff when I say it, but I'll explain it really well because I think that there is a chance the 49ers could throw in some different looks. I think Robert Saleh already kind of leaned into it a little bit. And so we're going to get into that in just a second. But if you're going to bet on the big game, bet with FanDuel. The right now, you look at the Seahawks, they're 4.5-point favorites over the New England Patriots. But if you don't want to just bet on the game, you want to bet on some of the things that are happening in the game, who's going to be the MVP, who's going to win the coin toss, what color the Gatorade's going to be. All those things are available, and you can bet on those with FanDuel. So if you want to have a little extra excitement with the big game, bet with FanDuel. But I want to get back into this because I was looking at the 49ers personnel. And anytime you look at the personnel, that's going to determine what a defensive coordinator can actually do. So we know the 49ers run a base 4-3 with a wide 9 alignment. That means those defensive ends are lined up out wide further than normal. The wide 9 is putting them completely outside the last man on the line of scrimmage. So with that, it's somewhat easier to pass rush because you got a more direct lane to the quarterback. Now, the weakness of that defense means you also generate what I call a bubble in the defense where you can potentially run the ball. That's why you see so many teams attack the 49ers 3-tech defensive tackle, get some movement on him. And once again, 3-tech is his alignment, where he lines up on the offensive guard. And so he's going to line up outside. He's trying to cut down that difference. Well, what happens is a lot of times they double that guy, get push, and it generates a huge hole for the 49ers defense. So what did we see the 49ers do? Well, early on in the 49ers' success, they may have given up yards on the ground. You look at 2019, Robert Saleh's defense gave up 112 yards per game on the ground. But if they got you to 3rd and 5 with their pass rush with Buckner and Armstead and Ford and Bosa and a pretty good secondary led by Richard Sherman, it was usually the 49ers getting off the field on 3rd down. So they were willing to kind of give up a little bit. Well, they've kind of put back the onus on, hey, let's stop the run a little bit. And they've given up some yards. Last year, they gave up 4.5 yards per carry. That's not good enough. They need to get that to a number more respectable, 4-1. I know a lot of people want to see him get to where Seattle was at 3.7. I think if you're staying in the wide 9, that's a little bit unrealistic. Just with the alignment, you're going to give up some yards. They're going to be able to generate some space to run the football. So I think that I look at the defense and I expect them to keep a base look of a 4-3 wide 9 for the most part. I think that will be the 49ers base. You look at what they do with Nick Bosa, him being able to come off the edge. We've been talking about them finding another edge on the opposite side of him that can really pass rush. They brought in Bryce Huff. I think Bryce Huff is a really good fit for what Raheem Morris wants, as he wants speed off the outside. Now we'll see if he's the actual player that Raheem Morris wants. But as far as a fit, it makes sense. I think when you look at the 4-3 defense in the wide 9, they've got the talent to do it. That's what they've been drafting for. But here's where I think it gets interesting. We've seen the 49ers, especially this season with Robert Saleh, run what's called a 4-3 over. And what the 4-3 over does is it takes your Sam linebacker and he comes up to the line of scrimmage. And what it does is it gives you a 5-man front. It gives you more of a 3-4 defensive base look. So in the 3-4 defense, you've got 3 defensive linemen. You got one that plays the nose, which is usually over the center. He can either play, a 0-tech, or he can kind of line up, on either side of the center. And then you've got 2 defensive ends, they call them, even though, 49ers interior defensive players in a 4-man front would be called tackles. They are called defensive ends in the 3-4, and then you get outside linebackers who are your edge presence who line up in a wide 9 alignment. So what is the big difference between a 4-3 over and a 3-4 defense? Only the personnel that are out there. When you go to a 4-3 over, your Sam linebacker comes up and he's the one that plays the edge, and then you usually adjust your defensive alignment to more of a 3-4 look, which means you take one of your defensive tackles in your 4-3 and move them to nose. And then you have your defensive end who was playing a wide 9 alignment come in and play what's called a 5-tech and line up over the tackle. So what I think when you look at the 49ers personnel, I think that there's an opportunity to run more of those looks. However, I think with how the 49ers personnel is, and with Raheem Morris coming in, that the 49ers can actually run some 3-4 principles. So I don't think that this defense takes a step back in Raheem Morris. In fact, I think it takes a step forward because I think they can be more multiple in their looks. They could really frustrate offensive coordinators if offensive coordinators don't know how to prepare for the 49ers from series to series. 49ers could literally run a 4-3 wide 9 look on series 1 and series 2 run a 3-4 base defense. And not all teams have the personnel to do that, right? You have to have the defensive ends that can play a 5-tech. Those guys are, if you want to talk about the traditional 5-tech look for a defensive end, think no different than Eric Armstead. Eric Armstead played 5-tech at the University of Oregon. DeForest Buckner played 5-tech at the University of Oregon. They were drafted by Trent Baalke to play 5-tech in the 49ers 3-4 defense. Well, when the 49ers were looking at a player that they could have set the edge in the run game in 2025 and then move inside to rush the passer, they drafted Mikael Williams. Mikael Williams is a 5 tech at Georgia. So what do you have to play a 3-4 style defense in the NFL? You have to have a 5 tech. The 49ers have one with Mikael Williams, but it's not just Mikael Williams. If they only had Mikael Williams, it wouldn't make sense for the 49ers to run some 3-4 looks. However, they also traded during the season for Keion White. He also played 5 tech at New England. So now you have 2 guys that can play 5 tech in your defense, which means you can go to some looks and alignments that are 3-4 defense. Now, what would that mean for everyone? Well, first off, you've got guys like CJ West and Alfred Collins who can not just play nose tackle, but in Alfred Collins' case, he can play 5 tech as well, which means you've got a bunch of guys that can line up over the tackle, the guard, or the center and give you some 3-4 looks. What does that mean for Bosa? Well, it doesn't change a whole lot for Nick Bosa. Bosa lines up in an outside alignment. They can line him up standing up, which a lot of 3-4 defenses do. They can also have his hand in the ground, the same way the Chargers did a lot with his brother Joey. They can also have plenty of guys like Bryce Huff who played in a 3-4 style defense in Philly. Now, was it as successful for him? No, it wasn't. What I think it does is it makes it a little bit easier. Now you could go into the draft and you could say, you know what? We need to find a speed element, or even in free agency, a speed element that we want to rush off the outside in a 3-4 look. You find those guys, and then all of a sudden, you have an advantage over a lot of defenses in the NFL, or a lot of offenses in the NFL, where you can be multiple up front. Because it doesn't change a lot when you're talking about what it means for the linebackers or what it means for the secondary. It mainly changes what it means for the front. Yes, there's going to be different gap responsibilities, but when you've got an experienced player like Fred Warner, it makes for some opportunities for this team. So I think it gives the 49ers an opportunity to be more multiple. A 4-3 wide 9 and a 3-4 defense look at times. And I think because you have the personnel, it makes sense. The fact that you have Keion White and Mikael Williams, and a lot of people would probably argue Mikael Williams, it makes more sense as a 5 tech than he does as a wide 9 defensive end anyways. But you don't have to go away from what you do traditionally. You don't have to change this defense. You just become more multiple. You just become a lot more fun when it comes to offenses trying to figure out what you're doing schematically. So I think that is the front part of this, and the transformation of the 49ers defense is now you have the ability to run both. So the 49ers right now have enough personnel that they could do it. They could run 3-4 and 4-3. Do they need to continue to work and upgrade at linebacker, potentially with the will linebacker? Yes. Do they need to continue to improve when it comes to safety play and what they do there? Yes. But remember, Raheem Morris also drafted Billy Bowman last year, right? Speed, hyperspeed, athleticism at safety. I think that this starts leaning into some of the free agents that are around the league, but also in the draft, start looking for guys who have a lot of speed, have a lot of range, because I think with the fronts potentially altering from series to series or from play to play, from 4-3 to 3-4 looks, number one, that is very stressful for an offensive coordinator and for an offensive line. And the line blocking responsibilities, you don't usually go into games and say, you know what, we have to prepare for a 4-3 defense and a 3-4 defense and this sort of personnel and this sort of personnel and what the weaknesses are. Now, with the way defenses are in the league, you go against those, but your game plans become more complicated. They become more stressed. And I think that that's where the 49ers could find some looks, but also a lot more 5-man pressures. And I think that is going to be something that we're going to see from Raheem Morris. He likes to bring 5-man pressures. Running that style of defense allows you to run some 5-man pressures. I think that there's going to be a lot of cool stuff that comes from Raheem Morris, and his understanding of the 3-4 defense, his understanding of the 49ers personnel, I think is going to go a long ways. Now, what does that mean for the 49ers secondary? I don't think it means wholesale changes. I think that Joe Woods coming in, they will be able to tie everything together. But Raheem Morris has been around the NFL. He's been in defensive schemes like the Tampa 2, where he learned from some of the best coaches in the NFL. I mean, if you look at that coaching staff in Tampa Bay back in 2002 with guys like Monty Kiffin, and Tony Dungy and those guys who were extremely intelligent on defense. And then you go and you look him coaching with Dan Quinn in Atlanta and what Dan Quinn does with his cover 3. You've got a guy who learned the cover 2 and a Tampa 2 from the best. He learned from the cover 3 and what happened in Seattle, which was the basis for what the 49ers wanted to do on defense from 2017 when they hired Robert Saleh. He did that. He went and he's been around the league with different coaches. And I think that that's one of the things that I like about it, being pliable, being able to run what his personnel tells him he should be able to run. And that's going to be a significant part of this alignment. And I don't think it changes when it comes to coverages. I think that that's part of the reason they're looking for continuity when it comes to what they're going to run coverage-wise. They don't want a lot of verbiage changes. My guess is they probably won't have a lot of those changes, probably subtleties. A lot of the verbiage will probably stay the same because that will continue the growth of the young players. But I do think that means they could look for other players in free agency in the draft. And that's one thing I started the episode talking about is now you can go look at players who you would generally think is, well, that guy's a little undersized. He's more of an outside linebacker. He doesn't really fit in the 49ers, base defensive look. He's a little too light to set the edge in the run game. And all of a sudden, those guys become a little bit more enticing. A guy, like Romello Height from Texas Tech is all of a sudden like, oh, super speed rusher off the edge. It's possible. You look at a bigger defensive end. A lot of times the 49ers wouldn't go for a guy that's, 6'5", 285 pounds that can't generate enough pass rush in a wide 9, but you might draft him knowing that you're going to play him at a 5 tech sometimes. Guys like Keon White, Mikael Williams, who can be base defensive ends, but also slide inside, become more valuable, which also means guys like Arden Key, Charles Omenihu become even more enticing in free agency. It just kind of opens the door for some different things. And of course, you're going to move these guys around. They're going to play base defensive end in a wide 9. They're going to play 5 tech in your 3-4 look. But I think the 49ers now are setting themselves up for success. You're changing what's next. And it's a matchup league. And being able to adjust and match up against these teams that have been able to run the ball against you successfully, well, you get an extra big body on the field if you go to more of a 3-4 defensive look. Does that make you more susceptible to some other things? Of course it does. But, the days of just getting home with a 4-man pressure for the 49ers, I wouldn't say they're out the door, but I do think that that's going to be a little bit different now with Raheem Morris in town. And I think that this is a good hire for the 49ers when you start thinking about what he can add to the defense, his knowledge in a 3-4 defense. And, Kyle Shanahan's wanted to have a Raheem Morris. It doesn't mean you're going to get, like I said, a base defensive change where it's all 3-4, but I think a hybrid look could throw this league up in arms. A lot of teams do it with that 4-3 over, but they just put their Sam linebacker. Imagine if you don't put your Sam linebacker, but you have the personnel to go 3-4 looks, and that personnel can still run 4-3 looks with hybrid. That would throw some things off. And so I think that this is going to be extremely exciting offseason. I'm excited to see what Raheem Morris and the 49ers end up doing when it comes to personnel. I think it's going to signal some things. But when they get out on the field, there's going to be some unique looks that I think use the 49ers talent to the best of its abilities. And I'm excited about this too because Raheem Morris, even though he was in this current head coaching cycle and had a chance to get the Arizona Cardinals job, I think there's a chance that he could be around San Francisco for more than one season, probably 2, maybe even more. And, who knows if he ever gets another opportunity at a head coaching job. I think if he was able to help the 49ers win a Super Bowl, he's still young enough that I think he would get another opportunity. But this is the kind of coordinator you wanted to land on, a guy that you felt you could tie to Kyle Shanahan for a long time. And Kyle has a lot of trust in Raheem Morris. And that makes it the best type of situation when you have a coach that you have trust in, that you can count on, that you've went to war when he was in your room, and you've also went against in some of the biggest games. What makes them tick, and I think that they're going to push each other. So I'm super excited about this hybrid type defensive look that more than likely Raheem Morris is going to institute. When you look at the personnel, I think it just makes too much sense seeing what he's been able to do in his career. So let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think about this defensive idea of the 49ers running some wide nine still with their personnel that they have, the fact they have, the linebackers to do it, but also running some 3-4 defensive looks as well, that could kind of, cut down some of the run lanes and make it a little bit more difficult on teams to throw, but also making offensive coordinators adjust from play to play, series to series on what they're going to get from the 49ers. I think it's a lot of fun. It makes for some interesting matchups, and it's all about what can I do to make things more difficult on the offense. And I think this would definitely do it, make preparation a little bit more difficult for the league. So let me know in the comment section what you think about it. I appreciate you all coming through. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. This episode brought to you by FanDuel, the title sponsor of 49ers Cutback. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.